Hello, and welcome to the Plant and Animal Relationships Unit Internalization video. My name is Sean Tamers of KIPP, Massachusetts, and Erica Panakopoulos of KIPP, Massachusetts also helped create some of these master teacher materials. Our big unit question is, how do the living things in a habitat depend upon each other? And the anchor phenomena for this unit that we're going to use to answer this question is, why are there no new chalta trees growing in the Tiger Reserve? So in this unit, we introduce students to a real place called the Buxa Tiger Reserve in India. This reserve is a broadleaf forest type habitat, and it contains a special kind of tree called chalta trees. These chalta trees grow large fruit called elephant fruit because they're eaten by elephants. The mystery, however, is why are there no new chalta trees growing in this forest? That's what students work on finding out throughout the unit. Hint, and it has something to do with elephants. Before we dive in, please make sure you've completed these things as your pre-work and have a pencil ready. Let's take a quick moment to explore why this unit matters. As part of this unit, students learn that all living things are dependent upon all other living things, which is an important foundation for understanding about food webs and ecosystems later on in school. An example of this interdependence is the fact that nearly everything we eat is dependent upon pollinators in order to pollinate and reproduce. The fact that in the last 2 decades, millions of bees have died out in a phenomenon known as colony collapse disorder alarms scientists and farmers because of its threat to the food supply. Ultimately, all animals on Earth are dependent upon plants, and many plants are dependent upon animals. Without plants, we'd have a zombie apocalypse. Understanding that all life is dependent upon other life, and that a small change in one part of an ecosystem could have an impact on hundreds or thousands of other living things in that ecosystem, changes your perspective on life, the universe, and everything. So, into our chapter overviews. Our first big question is, how are habitats similar and how are they different? Students begin by learning about the anchor phenomena and setting up an investigation that will enable them to explore how plants grow and what they need later on in the unit. They make observations of and take measurements of seeds and then put them in 3 different conditions. Some of the seeds with water and light, some of the seeds without any water but still receiving light, and some of the seeds with water but no light. We're not going to grow them in soil because once they're in soil, it's difficult to see the roots of the plant. Instead, we'll be growing them in paper towels and Ziploc bags. You want to give them about 2 weeks to grow before having students observe them and take more measurements. There's a lesson after big question number 2 where students collect this data. Students then dive into the question of what sort of things can you find in a habitat and learn that both living and non-living things are in a habitat and both are equally important to consider. Students discuss the differences between living and non-living things and use a card sort activity to distinguish between the two. They then read a book called My Nature Notebook, where a little girl studies a habitat near her house month after month and takes detailed scientific notes. She observes non-living things such as soil and temperature that affect plant growth, and living things such as insects like ants and oak seedlings growing. She does this by cordoning off a tiny study area, just like many biologists and ecologists do when they study a habitat. In the next lesson, you get to take students outside to do a similar observation activity.
So one of the important early activities you'll be doing with students is taking them outside and have them begin observing a habitat like a scientist, which for this particular unit means learning about the habitat features. So living things like plants and animals, and non-living things like the soil, water, availability of water, sunlight, and other things like that. One activity you can have students do is actually create a square around a small piece of land and investigate all the living and non-living things that they can find in this small square. So we've got soil, we've got some grasses here, we've got some seeds at the end of the grasses, we've got some dead leaves which indicate there's living things above as well we should be aware of. And there might be a little bit of rock material in here. There might very well be some insects that students can find if they dig a little bit into the soil. And that can be a nice little microcosm to help them think about the features on a much smaller scale, the features of this habitat. Later on in the unit, students are going to be asking the question why certain trees grow in some areas and not in other areas. So they're going to want to be thinking about where trees are located in this habitat. There's some close to the water. There's a lot of little ones close to the water where there's sunlight available to them. But once you get in the canopy here, there's fewer there's fewer trees able to grow here because of less sunlight being blocked by all the leaves here. Now, if you're like us, you don't have a forest right behind your school, but there's a whole habitat that you can find even in really densely populated urban areas. Let's take a look. So, your school might look more like this, but the same habitat features still apply. Sunlight, water, air, soil, it's all here. Plants and animals, it's all here. So check it out. You notice we've got some great little species of pioneer plants right here. A lot of them have seeds on them. There's some flowers to attract pollinators, to disperse seeds and fertilize the plants. You'll notice that the plants are growing for some reason only in the edges of this sidewalk here, but not in the middle. So it's a great question to ask kids why that might be. It might be that water tends to gather along the edges here. It might be that the edges provide a little bit more shade for the plants. I don't know exactly, but there's a lot to see. You'll notice the culverts right here, you've got plants growing. Again, that might be because water during rains will drain down here and then accumulate and probably evaporate much slower than out here where there's no plants, right, and where the temperature is going to be higher. So if we walk along here, all kinds of great species of plants, really hardy little plants growing in these bits of soil. You might ask kids, well, why aren't plants growing right in the middle of the sidewalk here? And again, that comes back to the habitat feature of soil. Here they're able to get their roots into the ground, right? A little seed comes along, washes down maybe, stops right here, finds a little bit of wet soil, starts to grow, its roots get in there, and it's able to survive and thrive here. Oh, here we got a lot more. This is great. A couple more, some more habitat right here for plants. Just sitting in the loose soil here, right? It's super loose, this soil, but they're able to make a home here with their roots. So, no matter how urban the area is, it's gonna be a habitat for plants and animals nonetheless.
In the next lesson, students are introduced to the reference text for the unit called Handbook of Habitats. They read about living and non-living things in different biomes and habitats around the world and learn about the concept of biodiversity. By this point, students should understand the fundamentals of Progress Build 1 shown here. Pause now and read it carefully. Great, let's take a look at the Progress Build 1 focus task, focused on students demonstrating their understanding of living and non-living and biodiversity. Please pause now and take a couple of minutes to complete the task, then check back here for answers. Note that you have a writing task, checklist, and word bank to help in your response. Great, here are the answers for the first part of the task. All the plants and animals are, of course, living things, and things like the road, water, sunlight, and the Jeep are non-living. In particular, sunlight and water are important habitat features that impact how things grow and live within the habitat. Here's an exemplar response for the second part of the task. Go ahead and take a minute to read it and compare it to your own response. It's important to point out to students that although the number of pictures in each place are the same, the Indian Tiger Reserve has a greater variety of animals and more types of plants, whereas the Grand Canyon National Park only has 2 different animals shown and some plants, but it looks like mostly all the same type. Therefore, the Indian Tiger Reserve is more diverse. All right, on to big question number 2. What do seeds and plants need to grow, and how do they get it? Now that we've investigated habitats, we're going to look more specifically at plants to better understand why the chalta trees are not growing well. Students read the book A Plant is a System, where they are introduced to the idea of systems and learn about how the structures and parts of the plant help it work together to grow and survive. They do a flower dissection, where they take apart the parts of a flower and learn more about pollination. Students then check on the progress of their seeds to see how they've grown under different conditions. Students then play a game where they start to understand the role of space. Students then play a game called Seed Mania, where they start to understand the role of space as being important for seeds to grow. In this game, the plant won't survive unless its roots are long enough and it has enough leaves to capture enough sunlight. This concept is reinforced in the computer model that students explore, which is a top-down view of a park. The class places acorns in different spots to determine where they'll grow. The key takeaway is that acorns can't grow right next to existing plants, such as these oak trees here. They have to be spread out a little further so that they have enough space for their roots to capture water and their leaves to capture sunlight. Next, students look at a top-down map of the study site in the Bengal Tiger Reserve and note how much more crowded the plants have become in the last 10 years. They note that the number of all the trees have increased since 1995, except for the chalta trees. By this point, students should understand Progress Build 2. Take a second to pause now and read it. Great, so now students work on explaining why the chalta trees aren't growing. There's three possible explanations. The seeds aren't getting enough sunlight, enough rain, enough space, or enough food from fig trees. Students look at several data tables to investigate whether sunlight and rain have changed in the last 10 years. They put that information together to choose the correct claim and then write an explanation using evidence to support that claim. Please take a few minutes to complete this task and then check back here. Once again, you'll have a rubric and a word bank to support your writing. Go ahead and pause now. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the exemplar. You should have selected claim C. The chalta seeds have a lot less space to grow in. Here's an exemplar response below. You'll note that it restates the claim, uses two different pieces of evidence, and then fully explains how the evidence supports the claim in the last two sentences. Go ahead and pause now and compare it to your own. All right, on to big question number 3. How do plants spread their seeds to new places in their habitat? Now that we've determined that the chalta seeds don't have enough space to grow next to the old chalta trees, how is it then that they could spread to start growing in new places? And why haven't they been doing that? Students begin this part of the unit by reading the book Habitat Scientist, which looks at the alpine biome and some of the plants and animals that live there. Importantly, it discusses how plants and animals are dependent upon one another to meet their needs. Students then read about how different animals in the broadleaf forest habitat help spread seeds and are introduced to the important idea of animal droppings. Check out this specimen here. We've got the waste products in white and then 2 seeds that were undigestible by that animal, perhaps a bird, and these seeds have now been carried several hundred meters or even several miles away from where they were eaten. Dropped in the right place, those seeds could now make brand new plants in a new area with plenty of space. Who knew that looking at poop could be so much fun? Students then pretend to be different animals that help spread seeds and act out how they eat those seeds in fruit and then drop those seeds in their poo in a different area of the classroom. Finally, students learn about how the wind disperses seeds by looking at fine examples of wind-carried seeds and then making models of them to blow with a fan. Finally, we return to the Tiger Reserve and look at new data to understand what's going on with these chalta trees. Ultimately, students should now understand Progress Build 3. Take a second to pause now and read it. Great, now take a few minutes to complete Progress Build 3 focus task. Once again, you've got a writing checklist and word bank to help you out. Go ahead and pause now. All right, so the correct answer is D. The data tables told us that there's no more elephants, and students might have noticed that a fence was built between 1995 and 2015 that is now keeping the elephants out of the reserve. Go ahead and read the exemplar response below and compare it to your own. Pause now. All right, on to the end of the unit assessment. The questions on the assessment are tagged to measure both progress builds and standards. Let's take a look at a question that assesses Progress Build 1. Take a couple minutes to answer it, then check back here. Go ahead and pause now. Go ahead and check the answers now, and then we'll move on to the next question. This is a question that assesses Progress Build 2. Take a few minutes to answer this one. And here's the answers. This question assessing Progress Build 3 is a multi-part question. Go ahead and take a couple minutes to answer this one. And take a minute to check your answers here. All right, that does it for our unit internalization video. Thank you so much for taking the time to be as prepared as possible to teach this unit to your kiddos. For KIPP teachers, and I recommend this for everyone else, go ahead and finish taking the entire end of unit assessment to get a better feel for what students should know by the end of the unit. Complete your unit internalization guide and submit the unit Google form on kippstd.org, which gets sent to your coach. Then finish out these steps before you start teaching the unit. Thanks again.